Thank you, Ipek, so much, and Tassos. It's really, and Aisha and Millie. It's really a pleasure to be here, and it's been a long history now since we've been talking about this, so it's really amazing to have it come to fruition, and it's really a pleasure to be in a group, with a group of such diverse backgrounds that, I've never presented this material to a group outside of Lebanon, I think maybe once in Amherst, but it's really interesting to present it in a Turkish, with so many Turkish colleagues as well in a Turkish context. So that's great. So the title of my presentation is, actually, yeah, I'm going to be showing a lot of slides, so I can see is another Amherst on the site of ancient Beirutus, early impacts of New England on the Ras Beirut landscape, 1870 to 1920. And as Ipek mentioned, this presentation or paper is a shortened version of one of my early dissertation chapters on a history of Ras Beirut. And Ras Beirut is actually the neighborhood of Beirut where the American University of Beirut is located. And it's been some time since I've looked at this project, so it's really a pleasure to come back to it again because I really hope to revise it. And I'd love to hear your comments as architectural historians, because I'm not an architectural historian, but I'm really drawn to the material culture and the connections between places through architecture and material culture. And its inspiration really came out of a very personal experience, because my father is a professor at the American University of Beirut, and I was visiting his office one afternoon in Beirut as I was coming back from Amherst, and I noticed that all over the campus of the university, as you'll see in the buildings have the double sashed window pane, which is the kind that very familiar from Canada. But it just seemed to me when I've spent years in Amherst at this point, and I was looking at these windows going, why are these windows here? I mean, these windows are meant to keep out the frigid winters of New England, and here we are in the Eastern Mediterranean. It doesn't make any sense. So that was kind of a very small beginning into my inquiry of how these buildings got to the Eastern Mediterranean. And so I found that although the multiple sandstone red roof buildings of the AUB campus were built of local materials, they really incarnated a spatial relationship specific to New England. So in this presentation, what I'll do is show how the built landscape of AUB is not an exact copy of New England College, but how it represents a composite version of New England College landscape. So this is again very much focused on architecture and maybe is not really focused on the academics so much. So we're moving away from that perspective. But I will start with a bit of background that perhaps complements what Tassos was talking about in the founding of AUB. Which was known until 1920 as the Syrian Protestant College, or the SPC, so I'll refer to it as SPC or AUB back and forth. And I'll start with the significance of the choice of SPC's location at Ras Beirut and continue on to trace the evolution of its architecture through three phases of what I call monumentality, containment, and then gradual responsiveness of the architecture to its context. And I hope, again, to show how the spatial expansion of the SPC from 1870 to 1920 represents a composite version of New England College landscapes, and again, the material cultural ties between New England and this particular part of Beirut, Ras Beirut. So just to give some background, the SPC was born of the interrelated history of the 19th century religious revivals taking place across the United States, the Great Awakening, the country you're very familiar with, and at the same time, the burgeoning college campus tradition. So both the Protestant missionary movement and the self-contained college traveled first from England to New England in the early 17th century. In 1636, alumni of Cambridge University outside of London founded Harvard College outside Boston. Harvard graduates founded Yale College in 1701, and Yale graduates founded Princeton College in 1746. And then Yale and Princeton, in turn, were the mother colleges for their denominations, founding colleges as settlements spread west across the United States. So there's a continuity going. And following the same tradition, the builders of the SPC strove to create an historical architectural lineage with New England, SPC's founders were both former missionaries of the ABCFM, or the American Board of Commissioners for Foreign Missionaries, which was established in 1810 in Boston, and they were also New England College graduates, so they were carrying both of these traditions with them. And they were also, as somebody mentioned yesterday, relative latecomers to the Ottoman Empire, or the Holy Land, as they saw it, compared to the Russian Orthodox and compared to the French Jesuit missionaries. But by 1850, the Ottoman government granted the small Protestant community of Beirut millet status, giving them permission to build schools and churches. And the Anglo-American Syrian mission headquarters in Beirut comprised a substantial walled compound with a church, cemetery, press, and school on the edge of the old city of Beirut. And unfortunately, you can't see it very clearly, but the church is there, and it's this whole. So when discussions about the founding of a college in Syria opened, William Thompson, who is the acting pastor of the Anglo-American congregation of Beirut, insisted that it be founded at Beirut or nowhere, this is his words, and that Reverend Daniel Bliss be its first president. Beirut made an ideal location for several reasons. Its proximity to Jerusalem, which actually they were restricted from because they faced Greek Orthodox resistance. Its seaport accessibility, its frank residence, British consul protection, and its large population of what they called nominal Christians, in other words, Greek Orthodox, Maronite, Catholic, and where native and foreign teachers and students could be easily secured, especially after the 1860 Civil War, when many came down from the mountains to the city. And of course, Beirut's dramatic backdrop of mountains and sea also gave the college founders a dramatic stage for their endeavors. In terms of Daniel Bliss, he was also a member of the ABCFM Syria Mission and a graduate of Amherst College in Western Massachusetts. And over the next several decades, Bliss's friendship with the Dodge family of the Phelps Dodge Corporation ensured as the continued financial backing of the college pretty much until the 1950s. So there was no really question of lack of funding there. So that was very fortuitous for the SPC. So in December of 1866, the college opened to a class of 16 students. And for the next 7 years, however, they didn't have a campus. The small faculty and the student body moved from one rented house to another in what they described as, quote, an unsettled state, and the college was looked upon by the natives as an experiment which might succeed or not, unquote. So clearly, college buildings and grounds were needed to establish a sense of legitimacy and credibility. So it was with this in mind, that President Bliss and David Stewart Dodge, who had the funding, were unsettled with what they called their college on wheels, set out to look for a permanent site. So by 1868, they found the ideal site, and they secured the funds to purchase the first tract of land of Ras Beirut, which is that projected area there. This is looking up to it, and this is actually, I think, by the 1890s, the first college buildings were built on the top, the main one with the tower. And almost the same breath that Bliss described the site chosen as the finest site in all of Beirut, if not all of Syria, he explained that they paid for the property far more than its market value. It scarcely had a market value. It was the home for jackals and a dumping place for the offal of the city. So that only Anglo-American eyes could actually see the potential of this site, reinforce the missionary sense of their own destiny. So Ras Beirut, or the head of Beirut, was the most geographically prominent and exposed part of Beirut. So it's that tip of the peninsula there, and there's a photograph down there much later, and another angle from the east. Facing northwards, Ras Beirut is defined on its western flanks by the hard rocky ridges overlooking the Mediterranean Sea, from the south by sand dunes swept up from the prevailing southerly winds, and from the east by the foothills of Mount Lebanon. Ras Beirut's exposure and sparse habitation presented these Anglo-American missionaries an ideal wilderness in need of taming. Moreover, Ras Beirut overlooked the harbor, the city, and had a magnificent view of the snow-covered mountains to the east, The colleges stretched out to the sea, in turn, would be immediately visible to ships coming in and out of the port. So Ras Beirut's location, in other words, was quintessentially endowed with the physical and sensory qualities necessary to ensure that the SPC was a city on a hill and would act as a gravitational force and destination. So in Ras Beirut's topography, SPC's builders found inspiration to perpetuate their idea of the creation of a model community. New England's early colleges defined themselves as model communities, upholding their claim to prepare their charges to send out to the rest of the world. Amherst College, for example, built on an elevated site above the physically mundane, cast itself as a college on a hill, and its seal reads, Terras irradians, let them enlighten the land. So Bliss, a graduate of Amherst College, wrote from Beirut to his former professor at Amherst College, William S. Tyler, recalling, quote, my first impressions of Amherst College have never left me. What we witnessed on entering the college was such a contrast to all that we had been accustomed to in our own previous observation and experience that it seemed as if we had passed into another world. So this combined force of his Amherst past and his imagined future is what he saw as shaping the SPC's world. And he chose the dramatic setting of Ras Beirut because of its topographic symbolism, I would argue, and its shelter from the city. You know, the fact that as the city was regarded in this kind of puritanical mentality is associated with contamination and decay. So the fact that it was apart from the city meant that it was somehow more pure air and cleaner. So Ras Beirut gave SPC the height, the expanse, and the distance from the old city on a breezy promontory overlooking sea and surrounded with 25 acres of college property. SPC's acreage, in fact, exceeded that of the ancient intramural city of Beirut. So again, if the choice of Ras Beirut as SPC's site recalled the New England frame of mind, then I would argue that SPC's architecture evinced a New England frame of reference. So by 1873, 4 of the first SPC buildings were complete: the College Hall, the Medical Hall, a dining hall, which was called the Ada Dodge Hall, and an observatory. And like their New England prototypes, their monumentality signified the importance attached to education. The first SPC building to establish the line of red roof sandstone structures along the upper ridge of Ras Beirut was College Hall. And in his cornerstone laying speech in December of 1871, William Dodge of New York referred to, quote, this beautiful situation on which to build the campus. He described his first building as one of, quote, commanding proportions in accordance with plans designed by an eminent American architect, and like a city set upon a hill, or as a lighthouse at the entrance of your harbor, will be one of the first objects which will meet the eye of the stranger entering your port, unquote. So again, the metaphors of city and lighthouse standing for this idea of self-righteous enlightenment and leadership were immediately made relevant to the landscape of Ras Beirut. And at the same occasion, Bliss famously announced that, quote, this college is for all conditions and classes of men without regard to color, nationality, or religion. A white man, a black or yellow, Christian, Jew, Mohammedan, or heathen may enter and enjoy all the advantages of this institution for 3, 4, or 8 years, and go out believing in one God, in many gods, or in many gods, or in no God, unquote. So while these words bespoke an openness and tolerance, the building they commemorated did not really create that impression at all. Indeed, the College Hall was an overwhelmingly massive structure meant to command its surroundings, inspiring not acceptance but awe. So in its colossal scale, the College Hall is down here and examples from New England above, College Hall followed a trend established by New England's oldest colleges. Harvard's first building was the largest structure in the 17th century English colonies, and Princeton's Nassau Hall was the earliest quote-unquote all-in-one college prototype, and it was the largest building in 18th century New England. College Hall also had an all-in-one type of building which accommodated all of the college's needs, from housing, classrooms, library, chapel, faculty rooms, and the prep school. Like Princeton's Nassau Hall, College Hall was also fronted by a green space, marking another feature that was repeated across New England campuses. And in fact, the word campus, a landscape now inseparably associated with colleges, was first used in reference to the area in front of Nassau Hall. The open green on College Hall's north set it back from the ridge, giving it a north-south access to complement its predominant east-west line. Moreover, College Hall dominated Ras Beirut's promontory and was among the largest structures in all of Ottoman Beirut, coming close in scale to the Grand Sarai, or the Ottoman barracks, which was built in 1853, and that was the largest building in Ottoman Beirut. The blueprints of College Hall are signed by just Geo B. Post, architect 120 Broadway, New York. And this was not the famous professor who worked at AUB, was George E. Post, who was SPC's first professor of surgery, but this was his first cousin, who was a rising star on the New York architectural scene. And in 1870, Post had just completed the Equitable Life Assurance building, known as the first elevator building, which set the skyscrapers trend in New York. So post-New York skyscrapers perhaps found expression in the height of SPC's College Hall. College Hall's most pronounced feature, of course, was its clock tower, which regulated the hours of the SPC students' days. It rang 11 times, first at 6:15 a.m. and last at 5:30 p.m., and it was referred to the locals as Binayat al-Sa'a, or the building of the clock, and its bell punctuated the time also beyond the walls of the college to the neighborhood, the small neighborhood of Ras Beirut. In 1874, it was the only clock tower in Ras Beirut and the second in all of Beirut itself. The first tower was actually built by the Anglo-American church, which was located, as I showed in the first slide, closer to downtown Beirut. A few years later, then, clock towers featured predominantly or prominently in cities across the Ottoman Empire, following the trend of Hamidian modernity. In Beirut, several more sprouted out at the Saint Joseph College, the Sarai, the railroad station, and the French hospital. But College Hall's tower had a distinct geographic and hence authoritative advantage over the others. Because it stood out high on the promontory of Ras Beirut, its time could be read by telescope from the mountains. So it had this kind of iconic status. And in the 1930s, when they renovated the tower so that the clock would actually be put on top of the bell, because originally the bell was on top of the clock, this was actually the request of Sheikh Muhammad Barbir, who was the timekeeper of Beirut and the imam of the Omari Mosque, and he was the one who asked for that to happen, that the clock actually put above the bell, because they relied on it for the call to prayer. And another feature of American collegiate design that resonated on SPC's campus was the axial alignment of the buildings in the so-called College Row. The College Row first appeared at Yale College and then was copied with slight variations on several college campuses. For example, Amherst College's College Row comprised its first three buildings: a square clock tower positioned Johnson Chapel at the center to command the view of the surrounding countryside. Rising above the tree line, Johnson's Chapel's tower defined Amherst's skyline, as College Hall's tower in Beirut would mark Ras Beirut. So with the completion of the medical hall to the east, which is the farthest building to the right, and the Ada Dodge Memorial Hall, which is the farthest building to the left, College Hall centered the emerging east-west College Row of the SPC, complementing the linearity of the upper ridge of Ras Beirut. So the Ada Dodge Memorial Hall, which was the dining hall, and from this angle you're seeing it from the east, and this angle you're seeing it from the west, so you have the two towers complementing each other, spilled out directly onto the first east-west artery of Ras Beirut, which is today called Bliss Street. And Dodge Hall's multiple red-tiled roofs and its high, unadorned walls zigzagged along the walls of the street west of College Hall. Its most prominent feature was a freestanding square tower, which was kind of a pseudo-campanile, that rose well above the roof line until its unexplained destruction in the 1960s. So the tower guarded the college's entrance, directed the traffic, and set the orientation of the oncoming pedestrian, horse-drawn, and later motorized traffic, giving the street a distinct character. It was a familiar landmark to all who passed it. The tower marked the slight elbow in Ras Beirut's main street, Bliss Street, and though it was shorter and stouter, Dodge Tower complemented the College Hall's tower and contributed to the extension of the townscape horizontally and vertically. But the architectural kinship between the SPC and Amherst College is perhaps most evident in the synchronicity of SPC's chapel, known as Assembly Hall, with Amherst College's Stearns Church. And in a letter dated September 31st, for some reason, 1870, that same Amherst professor, Professor Tyler, wrote to Daniel Bliss of the newly designed Stearns Church at Amherst College. And in that letter, he enclosed a photograph of the plan of the church in his letter for Bliss to use as the model for his, and I quote, this is the title of the talk, of his Amherst on the site of ancient Beirut, unquote. So while the chapel was not built until 1892, the similarity in design suggests that Bliss kept Tyler's advice in mind. Like Stearns Church, Assembly Hall featured a Gothic exterior, a cruciform plan, and elaborate rose windows on 3 of its 4 arms. The interiors of both buildings convey an almost identical sense of space. In both, the unadorned walls expose the ribs of the groin arches, creating a vastness of diffused colored space from the stained glass windows. And to many SPC students, Assembly Hall carried an iconic significance and represented, quote, tangible evidence of the university's history, unquote. Williams College set the trend with the first college observatory in 1837, and SPC's Lee Observatory, which is really hard to see, but it's right there with the mountains behind it and the sea in front of it, kept the clock tower's time based on recorded meteorological observations and star positions. SPC's professors Cornelius van Dyck and Faris Nimitz started systematic records of meteorological data and sent daily telegraph reports to the imperial observatories in what they called Constantinople and Vienna. Ship captains consulted its records to adjust their chronometers, and in the local context, Professor Mansour Jourda, who's a local SPC professor, wrote that the observatory had won even the confidence of the local community, and Dar al-Fatwa, the Muslim house of ruling, depended on the telescope to record the birth of the moon to announce the start of the holy month of Ramadan. So the clock and the observatory were very fundamental features also for the local community. Now, Post Hall was the most unusual of SPC's building, and it stands to the east of College Hall, the big one at the top there, and fills the College Row to the medical building. It was completed in 1902, and its design was actually the work of the professor of surgery, George E. Post, not his architect cousin, who designed College Hall. Possibly inspired by his cousin's winning Tudor design for the City College of New York, George E. Post gave his imagination free rein in the design of Post Hall's maculated towers, high citadel-like walls, and protruding waterspouts. In the late 1890s, Princeton University adopted a Tudor style, especially